All right, I touched on the play calling a bit earlier in today's show. I thought the game plan against Montana State was pretty plain, pretty vanilla, pretty simple. And guess what? When you have way more talent on the other side, what else should you do? Nothing but that. Why show stuff? You keep stuff in your back pocket. Save it for the Penn State game or any other game that gets tight. You don't need to put everything. You don't need to put all your cards on the table right now. So, Who Dat Duck sends in this take on Oregon's offensive coordinator, Will Stein, now in year 3. Oregon Ducks opinion. I'm going to attach a Spencer scale of agreement to this. Will Stein is overrated and the benefactor of amazing talent. I find that his scheme and play calling overvalues stretching the ball sideline to sideline and has thus made the quick hitch and wide receiver screen my least favorite play calls in all of football. The passing game feels like they're still unable to consistently push the ball downfield, hit timing passes, or scheme open receivers. Inversely, when thinking about the run, it's hit or miss, as I remember many of the longest runs against Montana State were initially stuffed but poorly defended on the edge, allowing for chunk yards on bounce outs. Ultimately, I do not have specific stats to back my claim up, and this is just based on eye test. Talent is extraordinary, but the scheme leaves something to be desired. Okay, a lot to unpack here. I get where your head's at. My head is not there, but I do get where you're at. As I mentioned earlier in today's show, yeah, I'm interested to see and would love to see them be able to connect on some downfield shots. Dante Moore didn't hit one of those. I think his longest completion was, I don't think it was very long. It was the 50-yarder to Jay Harris, which was a Texas route. Kyler Casper had a 40-yarder. The next longest reception was Kenyon Sadiq had a 20-yard touchdown, and that was completed 5 yards down the field. Really, the biggest pass that Dante Moore completed was an 18-yarder to Malik Benson. I think that was the touchdown. Might have been on the deep in cut as well. But, yeah, there wasn't a ton of pushing the ball down the field. And, you know, of course, we've heard from Washington fans plenty over the last year that it's a dink and dunk offense, all this sort of stuff. So, Stein overrated, a better factor of amazing talent. Man, I can't get there. I really can't. A coach that is being elevated by his talent would be Mario Cristobal and Marcus Arroyo with Justin Herbert circa 2019. Okay? Once he had a better offensive system and better coaching, he became a top 5 to 7 quarterback in the world. And he looked really good at Oregon. He didn't look like that. So that's an example of, boy, if you didn't have this guy at quarterback, what would you really look like? And the answer, of course, came in the form of Anthony Brown in 2021. And he even had a better OC in Joe Moorhead. So when you watch the Oregon offense, there are a lot of RPO tags to run plays. I do think that for the sake of the offensive line, you know, being able to fully engage in a block and not worry about going down the field, it is good to have some more straight runs, and Oregon doesn't always do a ton of that. They did some. You know, anytime Oregon's under center, very seldomly are you going to have RPOs in those situations, and that was the first play of the game, and Oregon created an explosive. Doesn't mean I think they should do that all the time, but no, this one for me is a 1.5 on Spencer's scale of agreement. The only reason I stick the half in there is because it's not because I don't think the offense can take shots down or can't take shots down the field. Like they're just physically incapable. Will Stein won't let him or anything like that. There is something to, you know, Tom Brady's critics for a long time would dub him Captain Checkdown, which was always an overblown moniker. But it's because when you watch a lot of Brady's best drives, I remember this unfortunately very vividly as a Seahawks fan, the drive where they took the lead before the Seahawks screwed up and threw it on the 1 yard line instead of giving it to Marshawn Lynch, which was a Jeopardy clue the other day. I'm never going to get away from that, ever in my entire life. It's brutal. It pops up at the randomest times. I remember watching that drive, and frankly, for a lot of that game, I remember watching it going, man, he's just throwing underneath the whole time. You know why? Because it's there. Because it is there. I don't think that there is something wrong with taking things that are there. If a defense is sitting back and too high all game and they won't bring a guy down in the box, but they're just going to run, you know, a quarters coverage that's just meant to keep everything in front, why in the world would you throw into the middle of it? which is why what I talked about in the first segment, I think is a really interesting thing to watch this week. Does Oklahoma State want to take that away? Do they want to say, we want to force you to throw it down the field? I don't think Will Stein, they've created explosives since he's been there. I can think of several off the top of my head to Troy Franklin. The explosive passing plays were a huge part of why they beat Ohio State a year ago at Autzen Stadium. I don't think it's that he doesn't know how to call them, he doesn't want to call them, or that he's telling Dante Moore to not take those shots when they're there. It's just that he does emphasize, number one, RPOs, which can be a healthy number of his passes. And by the way, if you scheme them correctly, those can turn into really easy first downs. And number two, he emphasizes to his quarterbacks correctly, hey, there's nothing wrong with taking 5 yards on first down. It doesn't have to be, if he gets into a second and short and you're on the other side of the 50, yeah, I do want to see you take a shot. Because you should feel like if we have 2 plays to get 2 or 3 yards, yeah, we should have the confidence to do that. This is Oregon. This is not some poverty program, as Mike Gundy has noted. So, back in the Mario days, 2nd and 2, 2nd and 3 was a running situation. Like, no, I'd be okay, especially against Oklahoma State this week. I would certainly be okay with, any kind of 2nd and 4 or less being, hey, let's see if we can take a shot here. And I do want to see more of that, but the eye test and it being overrated, it's different than some other offenses, sure. But I can't look at a guy that's put back-to-back quarterbacks in New York City as a Heisman finalist and say, this is an overrated offense. It's just the talent around him. Like, no, we don't know yet what Dante Moore is going to become as a quarterback. We do know through one game that he's at least capable. Now, against inferior competition, he looked capable at UCLA too. So we can't draw sweeping conclusions just yet, but the track record of doing it with different types of players, highlighting different skill positions, and getting them involved in different ways, I can't get into the Will Stein is overrated camp. I really can't. Even if, you want it to be, like, I guess you want it to be quicker. Like, you want the drives to not last as long. I don't know. I just want points to be scored. And when I look at the numbers and the production from a variety of positions, I can't argue with those results. So the downfield thing, yep, I'm going to watch for it this week and throughout the year because eventually you're going to have to do that. As we saw a season ago, you got to create those chunk plays at some point. But yeah, so for me on Spencer's scale of agreement, that's a 1.5. I didn't even get to wide receiver 1 because I was ranting about that for so long. I get why you have the thought. I'm just not there. I'm not there. Who's going to be wide receiver 1? Oregon's 2024 recruiting class still to come on today's show.